Well, we're in dark days in America. We really are. We're in very, very dark days. This is probably the darkest time ever in a lot of ways. We have a defense bill signed that authorizes preventative detention, indefinite detention. So we don't, at one point, we had a class structure shilling as a democracy. At this point, we don't even have a democracy. And we have to face facts, and we have to realize that any and all dissent now is potentially criminalized. Occupy Wall Street is potentially criminalized. I can understand the mixed feelings that many of my African American viewers will have in watching this video, but you're going to have to face the fact that you never really did get what you wanted in 2008. In a strange, funny way, you got another version of the same thing that we've always had in this country, and that is, the power structure, going back to the beginning, you had the landowners and you had the people who dominated society and got in a system of government that they wanted. And you have it today. Barack Obama has perhaps tried to implement certain good policies, healthcare, helping the environment, but at some point the political pressure got to him and he caved very quickly. Very, very quickly. I'm sorry to inform you, America, and particularly African Americans, but the great hope has failed. And now we have a degree of dictatorial repression that Dick Cheney could never get away with when he was running the country through his puppet George Bush. And you have a situation where it could be anybody taken off the street and accused of being a terrorist, and there's no trial. Thank you very much, Barack Obama. No, I won't be supporting you for 2012. I'm going to be looking to third party candidates. How did we get off the track like this? I mean, how did America, it seemed like it was so promising during the time of the beginning, where you had the movement of the Enlightenment, and you had the Revolutionary War period. Then you had the various reform movements. You had abolition, you had reforming child labor, you had FDR, you had Kennedy. How did this happen? I seem to be brought back in my thoughts lately ever more to Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau being somebody who is well known as, the guy who lived in a cabin. Everybody knows that, he's the guy who loved nature, right? Very, very, very few people in the United States ever discuss uncivil disobedience. Very, very few people ever do. Walden is discussed ad infinitum, particularly among naturalists and natural historians and people who think that they understand Walden. In other words, the guy who went up to Alaska and basically got lost and disappeared thought that he understood Walden and what it was all about. But you do not understand Walden unless you understand on the duty of civil disobedience. And you do not understand what he was really trying to say to our society, to American society. He stated at some point, might have been on civil disobedience, but some other point in his writings where he was writing about the state of society as it is, that slavery is not simply the lash in the South, 1,000 slave owners in the South. Slavery is also 1,000 merchants in the North. Words to that effect. I'm not quoting him verbatim. But what he's essentially saying is that the structure of society is just that. It's a structure, and we all participate in it. And the failure to analyze the way in which we participate in it is detrimental to us. Because you see, as we stood by at the time and allowed slavery, was the extent to which we were standing by and eventually allowing the enslavement of ourselves. It's not just cosmic justice or some kind of a spiritual narrative. I mean, it is actually what is happening. When you allow, when the slave power was allowed to expand west, what was the natural thing that the slave power decided that they were going to want to do? Well, why don't we start enslaving whites? Their own writings. I mean, you can go to George Fitza's Cannibals All, or whatever. You can see that they want to enslave white people too. As they got the power to seize land from Native Americans, they also got the power to seize land from us. I mean, look at this Alaska pipeline. It's entirely, George, what's the guy's name? The tax guy. You know who I'm talking about. The one who goes around advocating for zero taxes. He was interviewed on 60 Minutes a while ago. Whatever the hell his name is, all right? He supposedly is for free enterprise, but this oil pipeline that they want to put through Canada to the United States is predicated on the idea of eminent domain, seizing land from ranchers and giving it to a private corporation to build this pipeline. A monopoly pipeline. Grover Norquist, that's the guy I'm thinking of. Okay. So, it's an apparent contradiction, but it isn't. As the government has the power to seize land from Native Americans, it has the power to seize land from you. As they have the power to make all sorts of exception clauses in the all men are created equal statement, they can make it any way they want. It's not like there's something about being white that exists somewhere in the cosmos that exempts you. I mean, the minute that you can make exceptions to the idea of natural rights, you can make exceptions for anybody. And so it was only natural that what you would get once the military-industrial complex was built up, and there were, all kinds of exceptions that could be made. This group of people we can do medical experiments on. This group of people we can dump radiation on or depleted uranium, whatever you want to call it. At some point, you become the exception. At some point, you and I become the exception to the rule. The whole idea that let's say John Yoo had, that the executive branch of government has all the powers that King George once had. I mean, that's some nonsense idea they were throwing around. The Supreme Court threw that out in the Youngstown decision. But it's 10 times worse now than it ever was then, because now they not only claim the power of King George, they claim the power of the kings of England before the Magna Carta. And this is the supposed progressive, Barack Obama. I don't want to know what's going to happen when Newt Gingrich or Santorum or any of those people get in there. I don't want to know. I don't even want to think about it. Henry David Thoreau tried to warn us. It was not just about nature and birds and ponds and explorations. That was fine. But Henry David Thoreau tried to warn us that unless we take a definitive stand for a different mode of existence, the mode of existence that he was pioneering, which was not just self-sufficiency, but a mode that is beyond exploitation, a mode that is beyond exploitation of the earth and exploitation of one another. Unless we do that, we lose our freedom. I mean, that was his whole message. That the republic that he was in becomes more despotic than even King George, should it be that there's some kind of a soulless, faceless machine, a kind of military machine that runs things. And sure enough, that's what we have. A soulless, faceless military machine running things. I mean, look, to those of you who are in the military, I apologize if this sounds like it's not intended as an insult. But I'm going to say something to you, and that is, yes, I honor you for your service. But you also have to understand that one of the biggest fears at the beginning of the country was of this idea of a standing army, particularly one that's involved in all things, law enforcement, the running of the country. The idea that, when you see these signs that say that freedom isn't free, and with the original context of what that meant was not going around the world to all these different countries. What that meant was standing up for your liberties here. Whether it was the common citizen telling the Constitutional Convention, no, we want a Bill of Rights. Whether it was abolitionists, whether it was reformers, whether it was people who've challenged all sorts of things. I would say Occupy Wall Street. They understand that freedom isn't free. And Henry David Thoreau understood that freedom isn't free. I'm not, those of you who are soldiers or those of you who are in the military, you can look to all kinds of war heroes, but I would also suggest that you look to Henry David Thoreau for inspiration too. And anyways, I'm signing off. Thank you.